Well, several years ago, I was teaching on Genesis 1. And the day that I was teaching on Genesis 1, it just happened to be Earth Day. Now, it wasn't planned, but it was both fitting and ironic. Fitting because Genesis 1 tells us of the origin of the earth and how it's good. And that we are to care for the earth. But it was ironic because there are many people who treat the earth or the universe as if it is a god. Or at least as if the earth or the universe is the source of all things or the ultimate power. Rather than treating it as what it is, as something created by God, but as if there's nothing greater or more important than the earth itself. And in many ways, Earth Day is a symbol of this skewed view of our world and of God. And another thing, when we read Genesis 1, we're told how the earth and everything else in the universe came to be. And so it's very natural that when we read it, we think of combating the arguments of Darwinian evolution. But there's a couple ironic things about this as well. First of all, it's ironic that so oftentimes science and the Bible are pit against each other, as if they are opponents, as if they don't work together or don't agree. But the sciences, the study of creation, began with people who believed the Bible and were studying God's creation and how it works. Science is based on the assumption of order, that you can observe things and you can recognize that certain things always work in certain ways. In other words, there is natural law. Certain things always occur in nature. And do you know who set natural law? God. God did. So science is the study of God's ordained order of things. But the other ironic thing is that some Christians act like Genesis 1 is first and foremost an argument against evolution. Now, you can make that argument. It's true that you can make that argument. But the subject of the creation story in Genesis 1 is much bigger than that. So what is it? Well, in the beginning, God. Look at Genesis chapter 1 and verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the water. So in the beginning, when it starts here with in the beginning, it's talking about the beginning of time, or the beginning of our earth, the beginning of human history. And so right off the bat, this begs the question, who recorded this? Because there wasn't anyone there to observe it, right? And so let's start with a little background on the book of Genesis. And I just want to make 3 points of background here. First of all, it was written by Moses. How would he know what to write? Well, some of this truth could have been passed down through oral tradition to him, but we also know that Moses was a prophet. In fact, considered Israel's greatest prophet. And God spoke to him directly. In fact, God uses the phrase face to face, that he spoke to Moses face to face to describe their conversations. And so this truth was revealed to Moses from God. The second point, Genesis is very well written. Not only was Moses a prophet, but Moses, he was also raised by Pharaoh's daughter, and he received a royal education. So he learned how to research. He learned how to write well. And so the book of Genesis is well organized. It has a very clear outline. It starts with an introduction that explains how God set human history in motion, and then there are 10 sections that follow that introduction. And each of those 10 sections tell about a different part or time in human history in relation to God. And each of those sections start with the words, the account of, or the generations of, and then goes on to talk about that time period. And the third point of background that I want to draw out is this. It's a question. What is Genesis about? Well, it tells how God created humanity to have a special relationship with him. It also tells how humanity rebelled against him and how God set his plan in motion to reconcile people to himself. And so we will see God create, then sin enters the picture, and humanity goes on a moral slide. Then there's a fresh start after the flood. But then again, there's moral decay and rebellion. And so God intervenes by forming a special relationship with Abraham and his descendants, through whom will come a Savior for all people. But now back to the beginning and how it all started. Let's look at verse 1 again. He says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." Now, this is a summary statement. This gives us the point of this whole account. And so, what is the subject of Genesis 1? Don't answer too quickly. It's not creation. It's God. The subject of Genesis 1 is God. Creation is what God did. But the main point is God. This is about God. And we'll see this. And catch this. He says, in the beginning. So when time and the universe started, God was already there. He existed before time and earth and the universe and everything else was created by him. The word created here is used in the Bible only of God, this specific Hebrew word. It refers to making something out of nothing. Now, see, others can make something, out of things that already exist, existing materials. You can put together two things to form something new. Like, I like to make things out of wood, but I can't make wood, right? Okay, so only God can create something out of nothing. And what did he create? We're told here in verse 1, the heavens and the earth. Now, heavens and the earth, this is a figure of speech. It's kind of like saying head to toe or night and day. It's a figure of speech where two opposites are put together to express those and everything in between. So to express the idea of everything. And so what did God create? Well, he created the heavens and the earth. In other words, he created everything. And so what does this first verse and the rest of the chapter say about God? Well, for one thing, God created. In other words, he did it, no one else. And since he created everything else that exists, there is no other God. He alone is God. And so, on one hand, this chapter is an argument against false gods. Israel had been enslaved in Egypt, and Egypt had many false gods. And not only that, they were also headed to Canaan, and Canaan had other false gods. And those false gods Those things that they worshiped as gods were things like the sun and the moon and animals, created things. Those aren't gods. They are God's creation. They're created things. So who is greater? God who created them or the created things? Obviously, God. And so the overall unmistakable point is that God is the one and only omnipotent creator. And as creator, he is sovereign over all of creation. And God has limitless power. He has an incredible creative imagination. And a couple theological words I'll throw out here. He is pre-existent. In other words, he existed before time. And the second word, he is transcendent. In other words, he is far above, far greater, and far different than anything that's created. So let's keep reading. In verse 2, he says, the earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. Now, these descriptive words, without form and void, or empty, and then the word darkness, are opposite of the heavens and the earth that were mentioned in verse 1. In other words, there was nothingness. It had no shape. It had no light. And it's described kind of like chaos. It's not fit for inhabitation. It can't sustain life. But then, like a hero who's bursting onto the scene, the Spirit of God is there, and he's ready for action. You see, it all goes back to God. It's all about him. Without God, we wouldn't be here. Without him, nothing we know would exist except for God. But he created us, and he made this place for us. In fact, God made a perfect place for us to live. As we continue reading, we're going to see 7 days of creation. And as we read about those 7 days here, notice that there is a 3 plus 3 plus 1 day structure. In the first 3 days, God forms or creates, or forms creation. He creates the different spheres of life, places that could sustain life. And then in the second 3 days, he fills creation with life, with living things. And then on the last day, the seventh day, he rests. And so day number 1, God creates light. Look at verse 3 to 5. It says, and God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw that the light was good. And God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening and there was morning the first day. Now, notice how God creates. How's he do it? He speaks. He says, let there be light, and there's light. He wills it into being. He simply commands it to exist, and it does. There's no long process. This is not hard for him. He doesn't need any help. He has absolute power. And then it says, and God saw the light, that the light was good. Now, when you read this, you get the impression of that God is evaluating what he's just created. Kind of like a craftsman who is admiring his handiwork. Oh, look at that table I just made. It's so nice. And look at the shape of the legs. And it's beautiful. And it seems sturdy. But this, when God says it's good, he's speaking of something more than quality. More than saying, well, that's well made. He's saying, this is good. Good here means that it is beneficial. It's desirable. It's useful. It's just right for what it's intended. So that table is perfect for that corner. And that's exactly what we need to set these things on. That table, it's just right. It fits, and that drawer, that's exactly what we needed. You see, this light, when God created light, light is necessary for life. It's needed for life. So it's perfectly fitting. It's just right. It's good. And then we're told that he named the light day and the darkness night. Now, in the ancient Near East, naming something or someone demonstrated that the person who gave the name had authority over the person or the thing named. So all creation exists because of God. It belongs to God. It's his, and he rules over it. And then we're told that it was evening and morning, the first day. This is speaking of time as we know it. We have day and night, evening and morning. It's divided into night and day. This was the first day. Time has begun. Now, some people read this about light being created on the first day, and they say, well, this is impossible because there's no sun. But they're wrong. Why? Because we're talking about the Almighty Creator God. Okay? He doesn't need the sun for light. God is the source of light, and he is greater than the sun. Okay, so we continue on day 2. He creates the sky, verse 6 through 8. And God said, let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters. Let it separate the waters from the waters. And God made the expanse and separated the waters that were under the expanse from the waters that were above the expanse. And it was so. And God called the expanse heaven or sky. And there was evening and there was morning the second day. And so the expanse and the name heaven here refers to the sky, our atmosphere. God created our atmosphere, but we're told that he separated water into 2 parts in order to do it, to make the sky. And so there's water on the earth that will make up the sea later, and there is what appears to be a vapor canopy above the sky, probably kind of like rain clouds. And God said, let it happen. And then we're told, and it was. And it was so. In other words, it happened exactly as God said, exactly as God wanted it to, exactly as he willed it to be. Now, we talked about this a little bit ago. What is this chapter about? It's about God, right? Now, in a lot of pagan religions, like even in Greek mythology, the sky is the domain of the gods. They sit around, you've seen depictions of Greek mythology, they sit around and they talk to each other, and they may be eating, but they're kind of watching people and talking about them and deciding what we should do and this and that. And in Greek mythology, they're arguing with each other a lot of times and all that kind of stuff. But is that true? No. Is the sky the domain of the gods? No. Who's it belong to? It belongs to God. It's his. He names it. He has authority over it. He alone is God. He alone is sovereign. He alone is all-powerful. He has no rival. So this is the second day. But notice one other thing before we move on. Throughout the book or chapter, he will say, and it was good. But here on the second day, he doesn't call it good. And you might wonder why. Why would he not? And I think the reason is because there's no land yet. It's still uninhabitable. And so let's move on to day 3. Day 3 creates the land. Verse 9. And God said, let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear. And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said, let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit, in which is their seed, each according to its kind on the earth. And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed according to their own kinds, and trees bearing fruit, in which their seed is their seed, each according to its kind. And God saw that it was good, and there was evening, and there was morning, the third day. So this day God creates the land as well as plants and trees and things that provide food. And this makes earth inhabitable. And again, God says it's good. And there are 2 other things to point out here. When God separated the water from the dry land, he limited the sea. In other words, he said, sea, you can only come up this far. This is going to be dry. Now, this is one of those laws of nature that science observes. And God created it. And this is why land is not constantly flooded, because the ocean only comes so far, because God said, bring the waters together, and that's far enough. But the point here is that God has power over the sea. Again, in the ancient Near East, the sea was seen as the realm of evil and of the sea gods. Is it? No, it's God's. And the second thing here is that I want you to notice is that when God creates the plants, he makes them with their own seeds and according to their kind. This refers, when it says kind, and he says it several times, but when he refers to, says kind, it's referring to the different species of plants. So he didn't just make one plant and all the other species of plants evolved from them. Okay? He created, he created a set order in plant life with distinctives. They're different. Trees are different than a tomato bush. The plants, the trees, they're all different. They have their own seeds. They have their own kinds, species. So he created order with distinctive plants and with the ability to reproduce, to continue growing. Now at this point, this is the halfway point of creation. The different spheres of the universe are made, they've been created, and they're ready to be filled. So day 4, God creates the sun, the moon, and the stars. Look at verse 14. And God said, let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons and for days and years, and let them be lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light upon the earth. And it was so. And God made the 2 great lights, the greater light to rule the day and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. And God set them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good, and there was evening and there was morning the 4th day. And so these lights, they are created and given to serve as signs of day and night. The sun shines during the day and the moon at night. And they're given to help us tell the seasons. And so God had already created light, right? But now he creates the things that function to give us light. And this is interesting. God doesn't need the sun to give us light. But he has designed creation so that life is on earth is dependent upon the sun. I mean, we need the sun. Why would God do that? because that's how he designed it. He's the designer. But if there was no sun, Earth would be uninhabitable. I mean, we would freeze, everything would freeze, plants wouldn't grow, nothing would work. And so the sun and the moon give light, and they help us to tell the time and the seasons. That's really all they are. I mean, what do I mean by that? Again, in the ancient Near East and other times throughout history and other places, the sun and the moon and the stars have been worshiped. The sun and the moon have been considered the greatest gods. But they're not gods at all. They're just part of creation, a sign of the times and of the seasons. They're God's creation. In fact, notice here that God doesn't even name the sun and the moon. They're just referred to as the greater light and the lesser light. It seems like they're being downplayed. Their significance is being downplayed. Oh, these are just nameless objects that serve people. They're not gods to be served. Also notice the stars. The stars just seem to be tacked on at the end of the sentence. So you get the greater light and the lesser light, God created them, and the stars. Almost like it's an afterthought. The stars, that's in verse 16, and the stars, they're also being downplayed. And the thing is some people look to the stars for guidance. They'll study astrology, and they'll read their horoscopes, and it's just nonsense. Stars are just lights. Stars don't guide your life. And this all points us back to God, the Creator, the sovereign ruler, the only God. All honor and worship is due to Him, the Creator, not to the things He created. Well, day 5, God creates water and sky animals. Verse 20. And God said, let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the expanse of the heavens. So God created the great sea creatures and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarm, according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters and the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth. And there was evening and there was morning the 5th day. So we see here what? That life is no accident. It's the direct result of God's will. God created the birds and the water animals, and they were all created according to their kind. And so He created all of the species. They didn't just evolve from one. And He blessed them, the birds and the water animals, and He blessed them with the ability to reproduce so life could be sustained. And it was good. And He mentions the great sea creatures specifically here. This refers to large whales and sharks and other powerful animals that live in the sea. And again, in the past, some people have feared those creatures as gods. But they're not. Again, they're just part of the true God's creation. Day 6, God creates land animals and people. Beginning in verse 24, it says, and God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kinds, livestock and creeping things and beasts of the earth according to their kinds. And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth according to their kinds, and the livestock according to their kinds, and everything that creeps on the ground according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. Now again, we see the animals are created here according to their kinds, or according to their species. He makes a big deal about this. The word kind there appears like 6 or 7 times. And this also implies that they have the ability to reproduce. But it's interesting that God doesn't bless the land animals here and tell them to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth like he did with the water and air animals, and like he will bless the man and tell him to do this. Now, why the difference? It seems that it's because the land is man's realm. It's where people live and rule. The animals live there too, but people will be told to have dominion over the land. It's part of of humanity's blessing. So let's read on, verse 26. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image and after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over the livestock and over all the earth and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and over every living thing that moves on the earth." And God said, "Behold, I have given you every plant yielding seed that is on the face of the earth, and every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the heavens, and to everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has the breath of life. I have given every green plant for food." And it was so. And God saw everything that he made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning the 6th day. So when we get to the creation of humanity, it's set off from the rest. It's different. You see, this is the high point of God's creation. People are created in the image and likeness of God. God gives them dominion over all the animals that live on land and in the air and in the sea. And God gives them the plants for food to eat. So yes, they were vegetarians. Which makes sense because there was no death, so you wouldn't be eating animals. But God blessed them. He blesses them and gives them the ability to reproduce, and he tells them to multiply and fill the earth and to rule over it and take care of it. So let's talk for a minute here about us being made in the image of God and what that means. So first of all, there are 2 words used here, the word image and the word likeness. The word image suggests a direct relation. So it's like this is like that. It's used of copies or replicas. And it can refer to a physical representation of someone or something like a statue. Now, the word likeness suggests that something is similar, but not exactly the same. And so these 2 words together are saying that people are somehow like God. Not exactly like God, but like God. And so you might say that we are patterned after him. And we were created to follow his pattern. But how? I mean, what does this mean? What does it mean that we are made in the image of God? Well, first, a couple things that it's not. It does not mean that we physically look like God, because God is spirit. He doesn't have a body. And secondly, it's not simply that we are capable of mental reasoning, that we can think and reason. This is probably involved, or may be involved, but there's more to it. Because, animals can reason just on a lower level. But you can't say that animals are made in the image of God. They're not. Or you can't say that, well, they have a lesser degree of the image of God. They're not made in the image of God, even though they have ability to reason on a lower level than humans. So only people are made in the image of God. So there seems to be several things that are part of being in his image. First, it involves the ability to communicate with God and have a relationship with him. Also, it involves having moral and ethical and spiritual capacity. In other words, we are able to make choices. We can choose to obey him. We can choose to follow. We can choose to imitate. And we're able to do those things. And we have the responsibility for our actions. And the point that is directly alluded to here in Genesis 1 tells us that being made in the image of God, it involves the fact that we are God's representative rulers of his world. We have the ability and the responsibility to rule and to have dominion. And so we are his stewards. And we are to represent him in this world. And we are to rule and take care of creation as he would. And so there's a few implications to think about here, some principles about life to consider when we're thinking about people being made in the image of God. First one, people are a unique part of creation. That means being made in the image of God, it means that all people have dignity and value. No human being is worthless. Every person has significance, no matter how young or old, no matter how healthy or sick or broken, no matter how high or low their IQ, no matter where they're from or the color of their skin. All people are made in the image of God and have value and significance. And this should impact how we think about and how we treat other people. But being a unique part of creation, being made in the image of God, that also means that people have a dignity and significance that is higher than other forms of life. And so people are not the same as or less than animals. I bring this up because in our culture, our pets, and sometimes all animals, according to some people, but our pets and sometimes any animal are treated as if they had equal to or greater value than people. And that's just not right. Second implication to talk about here about being in the image of God. We have the responsibility to represent God and rule over his creation. That means that we need to take care of it. It's God's, and we're responsible to take care of it. At the same time, we recognize that it was made for us to serve us, not for us to serve it. And so that means we have to find the right balance. The earth is not a God to be served, but it is God's creation that we are responsible to care for. And the third implication is that we were created to live in relationship with God. Of course, we know that sin has marred the image of God in us and has broken our relationship with him. And this is why we need Jesus. This is why Jesus came, to live a sinless life, to die on the cross and take our punishment for sin upon himself so that we could be forgiven and we could be reconciled to God. And the fact that we are sinners and the image has been marred in some way, This is why it's not easy for us to subdue and rule over creation well. But because of Jesus, one day that image will be perfectly restored, and we will be like Jesus. So to sum this up, humanity is made in God's image. God created people to have a relationship with him and to rule over his creation for him. And everything else was created for the livelihood of people. So in 6 days, God created the universe and all that is in it. The work of creating is done, but the creation story is not finished. We're told about one more day, and we learn that God set a pattern for us to follow. Chapter 2, verses 1 to 3. He says, "Thus the heavens and the earth were finished, and all the hosts of them. And on the seventh day, God finished his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had done. So God blessed the seventh day and made it holy, because on it God rested from all his work that he had done in creation." And so everything was completed just as God intended. And now he is done with that work. He finished and he stopped his work of creation. And this sets a pattern for those who were created in his image. And he makes a big deal about this seventh day. I mean, he repeats seventh day 3 times in these 3 verses. And he says that it is holy. In other words, it's different. It's set apart from the other days. It's not common like the other days. You see, there are 6 common days, 6 days in which you work and subdue the earth. And these are your regular put food on the table work days. And then there's the 7th day. On this day, you stop. And you rest from your work. Now, why would God do this? Why would he create this pattern for us to follow? Why would he tell us to stop and to rest? For one thing, to put it simply, is to rest. Because you need it. We can't go nonstop. We were not made that way. We were not created to go nonstop 7 days a week. And secondly, we rest to reflect on God and to imitate him. He rested, so we rest. Thirdly, we rest to remember the blessings of God and how he provides our needs. He created this world for us, and he provides for our needs. And on the 7th day, we rest and we remember that. And then fourthly, we stop our work as an act of faith. We trust God to provide for us when we obey him and rest. Because along with faith, when we do this, we're trusting God to provide even if we don't work that 7th day. But along with that faith, when we do this, we are showing that we are devoted to him, not money or stuff. And we serve him. We show that we serve him, not money or possessions. So we stop and we rest like he told us to. Now, when Genesis was written, people worshiped many parts of creation. Today, people still do. They may think, some of them maybe think they're a little more sophisticated at it, but they still do. Some people do it in the exact same ways. They worship the sun, they worship the moon, the stars, and other people maybe in different ways. But people will look to things like astrology, or will even wish upon a star. And then we replace God with Mother Nature and trust in Mother Nature and think of Mother Nature as the all-powerful. Or they put their faith in evolution. And yes, it is a faith. Some of the claims of evolution are so improbable. I mean, even statistically impossible. And yet they hold firmly to it. They put their faith in evolution so they can have creation without a creator, without God, and without being accountable to God. At least so they think. But Genesis 1 is a call to recognize the one true God, the omnipotent creator of all things. And it sets the stage for the relationship between God and humanity, whom he created in his own image. And it's a call for all people to worship him. There is one true God. Everything that exists because of him. And only he is worthy of our worship. Worship him. And worship only him.